Hi, right now I will explain to you, I will show to you how to understand here child element array key with mandatory constant name child, attribute, value, and inner. So let's go to my text editors right here and remove all those things and then say echo and div here and then print the divs right here. Remember that we are already installed the div there in the namespace, so the div is working for us. Okay, and now in order to perform a child within the div tag, so before that I will explain to you that in version 1.2 there's no callable type inside of this. So in version 1.3 and above, the callable value or callback function is acceptable as a value of this div tag. So now we are not going to talk about the string type and a callable yet, but we are going to explain the array type. How can we make a child how can we make a child using array, and what's the good between these guys right here and using array child? So let me show you these examples of callable type. As you can see right here, if we grab these codes and paste in text editors right here, what we see that within this div here, inside of this div we will see that the h1 element, the value high callback, and the attribute key and the attribute value, and the id have id value in a class, and this gonna be the attribute key and the attribute value of this div. So right here, so what I'm talking about here, you will see. And remember, I asked that you already know how to install SAP and how these work, and make sure that you are working with a 3.3.0 SAP or greater, so in order to work the PHP version 8.0 BAB. And here it renders for us the high callback from h1 element inside of this parent, which have attribute key and attribute value, and then the attribute key and the attribute value as well, and the id stand for, and class stand for class. So in the backend code you will see here that the code's gonna be look like this. So in order to avoid confusion, let me remove this because we are not going to, I'm done to explain to you how what is the attribute of this in the first. If you are interested how this if you want to understand how this works, like something like this, please watch the video how to install Wine, because I include that explanation on the video, on the very first video that I upload in my channel. So right now there is no attribute here, the div opening and the div close element right here, and within that, inside that, there is an h1 tag with attribute value, with attribute key, attribute and the value, and the id stand for id, and a class is auto generated for us, which is the Wine will do that for us. So this is the example of callable type value right here, and this is what we call callable. So what the good in callable is we can create conditions before the execution, right? So for instance, what does it mean? For instance, if this is true, okay, if this is true and then I want you to execute this, otherwise there's no execution happen. So let's me refresh that, because that is true, and it, of course, obviously it will execute because we met the conditions. What if we put the else here of false? So expect that nothing inside of the div tag because it returns false. So what is the string type here? So the string type is the right here. So how about the string type? The string type is only string that accept as a value of this div tag right here. So for instance, this is a string type value of div. So as you can see here, when I hit refresh, this is a string type value of the div, and that is only thing, or only that data that will be executed or printed or rendered in a browser inside of this div element. So how can I put a child in this approach. There are a lot of ways inside of this child in this approach. First, if you want to create an h1 tag here, let's say h1 and say hello world, and then hello world, yeah, hello world, and then the PHP native approach, which is the append or dot, and then create a file. And we've installed already the paragraph, and say this is a description. This is a description. We can do that, of course, if you wish, and that is still work. As you can see here, the hello world and this is the descriptions rendered inside the div element here, and then rendered before of this closing tag. So that means I have h1 here, and then the PHP tag, the paragraph tag under or the next of the h1, which is here, and we achieve that in this approach. However, this approach is not able to perform a condition if you want to put a condition inside of this. Okay, so all you have to do in order you want to write a condition here, remember how we do that, which approach we're going to use, of course, the callable functions right here. And then you can create a condition like I did before. Right, for example, make the condition and then the executions. Make sure there's no avoids right here, because avoid is not avoid type is not applicable when you use a callable a type value, because it must have return in order the element is stored inside of the div tab. So what I mean here, for instance, if you use a print inside of this, and let's say create an h1, what happened? Hello. See that? The hello render twice, and then not inside of this div tag, which is the print inside of this callable function is strictly not allowed, so it must be always returned, right? So in order that to store that h1 inside of this element. Okay, so here's the problem. What if I have a multiple lines of layer elements right here? For instance, I have here a v paragraph, for instance, paragraph, so and then another div here, and then say description. How can I render that? Remember that is not work if I don't return that, and if I echo that is not allowed in callable function side. There is a way. All I have to do is to append that in a variable called anything, or say element. For instance, for this demonstration, I will use the element array, element variable, and then store that element, those element, and then return that element variable inside of the callable right here. So return, and then okay, so it's worked. Yes, it's worked. Here h1 and the fee here, and then the descriptions. Let's check what's happening. So yeah, it's a fire. It's recognized a firework. Okay. Firework. Yeah, here. It's a firework. Okay, so element here, and then the firegraph. If you render that in the front end, you see the 1, 2, and 3. So what if I have a lot of element inside of that? Do I need to create a variable and start that append one by one? Of course no. That is how array type value comes into play, which is I explained this to you right here. So in this element child array keys, we have to use the child attribute value inner key mandatory in order this array element converted into HTML. So let's do that. For example, so what we're gonna do here is remove this function. So for some reason you can use that callable function if you don't need to, if you are creating a condition. But if you create a child, I prefer this child instead. So the reason, remember in the first video I told you that I don't want you to install all these things here, all these things to your header.php, because I don't want you to use that over and over again just once as a parent, like a div, and then use this child element array key, which is fastest and secure when it's rendered in a front end. So let's refresh that. By the way, this is an SS complete snippet when you create a child, and I will show you the tricks, and I will explain to you how this, if ever you need a child. Okay, so right here, let's hit refresh, and then as you can see, hello, this is a value array, hello, and let's refresh that, and inside of the div tag I have a demo right here. I will explain to you one by one. So in this child element array here, I have a parent div with no attribute right here, okay, and this is the closing right here, and then I create a child which have a class name demo. Okay, this is the attribute that's saying right here. Where is that attribute come? Here, the mandatory key array, child array value and inner. So this attribute key help us to generate this class here. Okay, so in order that the div have a custom attribute ID, for instance, all you have to do is to use this key and then associated of array, the value, and then, or an array which have key, and then assign it the value. For instance, I will add here, create say ID, and then let's say the value, this is my ID. So when I hit refresh, automatically through this attribute key, which is provided of wine, the mandatory before, in order to create a child element array. Okay, so attribute help us to generate this here converted into HTML. Okay, so now how about the value? The value is a string type, so when you use the value, must be expected this is looking for a string. Okay, this value is looking for string. So since the merge is a string type, all this element, HTML element is a string type, this is recognized as a value right here. So the hello is a string, consider as a string, so that's why the value at that. So in here you will see that this parent I div have a child, okay, have a child div and have attribute class name demo and ID my ID, and the value is hello, right? So I have an h1 merge element PHPWine, and then the value is hello, which is when I render here, say hello. So now we are going to explain the second layer, and the second layer have values. You can see no attribute. Yes, that is fine. With or without attribute, the layer element is fine. And if in fact, if you don't want to add a value, it's totally fine, as you can see here. But since I don't want to add class for this element child, for this child, I don't want to use the attribute, and that is totally fine as well. And now here, the value, this is a array value, so that here inside of this second layer of the div, I have a value, distance, and values. However, how can I put another div inside of this? So remember that this is the parent here, and that is here, and we creating a child using child array element, which is here, through this key we can generate a child array. We don't need to return one by one. We don't need to create a variable and append it one by one. Automatically it fetch us the wine vendor for us without returning any value this through this array. So the problem here, the question here, actually there's no problem. The question here, how can I add a child for this second layer? Of course, all you have to do is to use the inner key. The inner keys give you a way to add another element inside of these elements right here, like this. Remember that this second layer doesn't have an attribute, so this it doesn't have any class or IDs in short. So this is gonna be only a value. And here, as you can see, I have a p, which is another element for this element, and that is here. The value has say hello, it's just a string, and then the attribute class say demo, which is here. And then the span, another element inside of this div, is called span. Sorry, the element another next of the paragraph is span. So the value is hello from say hello and then the world, and then have attribute class a demo. So if ever we remove this here, they said if that is fine, it doesn't have a value. For instance, you use that on a JS, prefer for the JavaScript here, that is totally fine. And if you want that only a value, that is totally fine. It still works even there's no value. So return value here and then say hello world instance. Okay, that's hello world. And then I will create another layer, continue the layer, the child. So that means in this element div here, I have a 4 layer, which is 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layer, and 4 layer. So this one, the first layer child, and the second layer child, and the third layer child, and the fourth layer child, and that is an array. But the second layer child, I have another element inside of this, which is this here, the p and the span inside of this element, and that is fine. And in order to achieve that, which key should I use? Of course, the inner key. Okay, so what makes sense? What is the difference between inner key and then the value? The value is the value string type, while the inner key is giving you a chance to add another element. So how does it make more sense? For instance, let's say google.com, how that helps you in when you are coding, because as you can see here, for instance, I will create, remember that the div tag is the value. I am able to create a div because here is this string, the merge element. So I will create the function here and then the callable type, so I can return another element right here, right? Return say h1, and then the h1 say value string element, and that is still consider a child, right? So you see that, as you can see, I have another div here which is don't have any attribute within that value, and then I will have a h1 which is the same as the inner functionality. So what makes sense and how that things help me to achieve the code, or to achieve the my goal in HTML. So what the significance of these two? What's the difference? For instance, let's say in here section, most of the time, here design, here design, here section design. So in here section design, like this layout, this is going to be a perfect example. As you can see, this here is this one right here, not vertex specialty, is a value of this layer here, while this column 1.2m, and the image column 2, and the image the third column, whatever is that here, is inner. Okay, so the point here, if you are going to edit the file, the variant of your of your website in programmatically approach. If ever that you have too many array child, and if ever that you left your code in a couple of weeks because you have a new project, you are not getting too lost, and you are not harder to figure out where is that code on your code element child array, because the pointer is telling you, telling you that here is a value. So if ever that your client, if ever this is a static and your client want to change the title, you know where that in a code, you know where you are going to change, you know where the file or where the line you want to touch in order to update that. And this column or this row and column 1, 2 and 3 as well, because this column 1, 2 and 3 is a consider as an inner if these things is inside of the same div. But if this is one section and this is another section, that is fine. So as you can see here, this section doesn't have header, so that means this doesn't have a value. So that means the only things right here is a inner. So right here, let's try to remove this here and flash that. So here only the inner, hello and world, which is here. So in this demonstration or this example, this only inner, okay, because it doesn't a value if this is a new section from here to here. If this is a first section and consider this a second section, this gonna be a inner. So if you are going to backend code after a couple of months, you know where it is, okay. And if you are going to the code to update this, if this is a single section, you know where you go as well. If this is one section, of course still you know where you start to begin and which code section of that code you will touch, okay. So hope makes sense. And the tricks here, the trick that I want to show you here, remember that this is as I said earlier before I begin. What if I want this child last year, another completely the same as here? So that means I want this child demo. Let's change this into a new element. So let's say naming convention must be an element here. This new element having another as is from here to here. So how can I achieve that? All I have to do, of course, is to create a div here and then paste another child right here. As you can see, I have another from here demo remove this, store this from here to here, is stored inside of this here. So let's try. Yeah, there we go. So from new element, I have another element which is the child, right? So which is this div here, okay. No element, no attribute. And then after that I have another layer inside of that, which is the div, and have class a demo, and the h1 as well, the value as I explained this earlier. So this gonna be as is, and all you have to do is to use that, and that is with template if ever you need that structure over and over again. So the next video I'll explain to you how these things help you in element array keys, child and inner layer. So if ever that you are going to create a modulus, for instance, because in this approach you can create a condition, right? So imagine that before you execute that in 1.3, you are going to use if statement here. So if the condition is true, return this value, otherwise return this else. So how can you do that if you only create a condition inside of this element as a function or a callable function, right? So and that is how, remember that through this, for instance, this is a div tag here, and then you can create a condition through this in just if you are using a callable function or callable type, and then create a condition inside this. right? Condition. What if condition? What if in this layer, okay? What if in this layer, oh, you need to create condition. If that is met, the condition is true, generate this, otherwise generate this, have an error, or you are going to use immodulus. How you can achieve it? In order to achieve that, all you have to do is to use this helper, which is child element array key child and inner layer. Just use this element sort in the next separate video, because I maintain that the video is maximum of 20 minutes. So in fact we are going to over. Hope makes sense how to use this child element array, and you fully understand how this work is, and also the different type of uh, merged elements right here, which is the string and a callable type. Okay. And yeah, if you're working with an array child, in order that to convert into HTML, and all you have to do is to use this child key attribute and value, which is not mandatory yet, but in order that to render it to HTML converted from array PHP, all you have to make sure is this array is has a child element array. And yeah, it's the next video I will explain this to you. I think we have a too long video, too long. And if you later on, we will also explain to you how to use constants to help you debug if there is a missing element that you, or missing attribute that you put here, or misuse, to make long story short. Hope you like the video. If you like the video, please hit like and share and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and see you to the next video.